Well, let me go ahead and officially get us started here. Judge Wagner is not going to be able to join us today. She had a previous commitment, but kind of asked me to ringlead things here. I had sent out earlier this morning just to get some committee business out of the way, a document to everyone regarding the feedback that I have gotten so far from folks in regards to the questions about the March primary and the 23 counties that we identified that had 30% or greater voter turnout. I've posted in there, I think 8 or 9 counties have responded so far. And if others do, I'll insert those into the document as well. But I think the overall, response to our question of why were they kind of the exceeding outliers for the 24% statewide voter turnout, they had competitive local elections, most oftentimes county commissioners in that regard, or have an active base of voters that are reliable in terms of showing up to vote. So if anybody's got any further questions after they review that document, happy to do any kind of follow-ups y'all would like in terms of any issues or concerns. Very few across the board, and they were pretty much handled at the county level in terms of questions from voters. So we've got that kind of feedback that if this group decides is worthwhile in terms of incorporating into our report, we can certainly do that as well. I'll have some other data to pass along. I've compiled a kind of first big glance going back several election cycles in terms of the types of votes that North Carolina has had in its various general elections, but I want to kind of break some things out for some other dynamics. And if we have any specific questions from folks about that data, I can certainly do some more trend line analysis for this group as well. But I'll be sending out that information probably at the end of the week as the first stab at it, just to kind of get folks some data information about counting ballots here in North Carolina. With that, I will turn it over to Diane Silver. She is with Fair Vote, as I gave her information out and the links to her organization in that previous email, and talking about ranked choice vote dynamics. We've had this in North Carolina for a very small time period and window, and certainly I think Diane may be talking about that, but she'll kind of walk us through a presentation, and we'll leave some time for any questions, Q&A at the end of her presentation. Diane, do you have a formal presentation and the sharing capabilities?
I do have a presentation. Let me attempt to share it.
Okay.
And see if it'll go.
Diane, will we be able to get a copy of the presentation?
Sure, I'll be happy to share it afterwards. Let me see. Are you seeing my opener screen?
Yes, I am.
Great. Okay, and I presume not my presenter notes. Great. Okay, so I just want to share. I'm going to also be looking at the presenter screen, or the presentation. So I'm not looking at the gallery. So if anybody has a question, like a clarification question as we're going, please just chime in. Don't worry about interrupting. And then of course I'm happy to take deeper discussion and questions and such at the end. So I'll just dive right in. So I had heard from Jennifer Roberts last week. I was at an event where she was presenting, and she shared the work of this committee, of the commission, and that you are preparing to make recommendations regarding conducting elections in North Carolina. And so I felt like, wow, I think that ranked choice voting would be a terrific improvement to our elections here in North Carolina. And so I wanted to, my request, full transparency, my request at the end is to include ranked choice voting as part of your recommendations. So this is my pitch for why we should be suggesting that. It is a method of voting that gives voters more choice and more voice in their elections. And the big picture is, our politics these days has become very toxic. Voters have limited choice. There's a lot in the news these days, just looking at the presidential election as the most salient example, where people are saying, I'm not particularly thrilled with either candidate, and they wish that they had more choice. The reason that we don't have more choice is because of vote splitting and strategic voting. Whenever there are more than two candidates in an election, there's the potential for a split vote and for that spoiler effect, where people start to feel strategic. I really like candidate A, but I know that they're a long shot, so maybe I shouldn't really vote for them. Maybe I should vote for the one that I could live with, but who's more likely to win. And so people feel like they can't really vote for the candidate they want. And then also, obviously, if we have more than two, we often get non-majority winners. Our current cycle rewards and reinforces negativity. So much of our campaigning is about the dire, doom and gloom results that will happen if the other side wins, regardless of which side is the other side. This hyper partisanship that we're in, the political polarization. And that leads to non-competitive elections. We also obviously have the problem with gerrymandering, where many of our congressional seats, as a salient example, are safe seats for one party or the other. And so the decision is really made in the primary, because by the time of the general, everybody knows which party is going to win. And so that reduces choices for voters. And the general election is non-competitive. And the whole thing results in a feeling of a lack of representation. It used to be that elected officials felt beholden to all of their constituency, and voters felt that they were represented by whoever was in office, even if they're not of your party, that you could write to your representative and they would hear your views and respond. And these days, I think that there is a feeling, a perception, whether real or not, that if you're not of the party of the person in office, that they don't really represent you. A lot of people feel like they don't have representation in office, and it could be in Congress, it could be in the State House, it could be in the City Council. So these are a lot of the problems that are going on, kind of nationally. Just looking at some North Carolina examples, in our most recent primary back in March, here are just a few examples. In Congressional District 6, we had 6 candidates, and the winner is advancing to the general election with only 26% of the vote in that general election. There could have been a runoff. The second place finisher could have asked for a runoff because it's less than 30%, but they chose not to. They're going to go do something else. So that candidate is advancing with only 26% of the vote, and that's only a primary vote. That's not all the voters. That's a primary vote. I think you just said that the statewide turnout in our primary was about 24%. Is that what you said? There were a few examples you were discussing that had made it over the 30% threshold. So with a very low turnout primary, the decision is being made for everybody who that candidate is going to be in November. And if it's a safe seat for their party, then there's not a whole lot of choice to be made by the voters. In Congressional District 8, kind of a similar thing. There were 6 candidates. The winner is advancing with only 30.4% of the vote. So they squeaked by that 30% threshold, and they don't have to have a runoff, but it's not a tremendous vote of enthusiasm for that candidate who's advancing. Here's a really salient one. In Congressional District 13, there were 14 candidates. There is going to be a runoff in that one on May 14th. The top 2 candidates, as you can see, had 27.4%, 18.7%. But here's what really stands out to me. Those bottom candidates combined, if you look at from Josh McConkey down to the bottom, their total adds up to 21.6%. And so combined, that's a pretty significant portion of the vote when you consider that the second place finisher, Brad Knott, is advancing to the runoff with less than that. And so, you know, when you think about if there hadn't been so many candidates in the race, if the vote had not been split in so many directions, I wonder what would have happened. You know, if I was Fred Von Cannon, I might be looking at this thinking, gosh, if we had had ranked choice voting and votes could have consolidated around, you know, other candidates in a series of multiple instant runoffs, you know, maybe Fred might have made it to the top. Who knows? I would argue that even Kenny, I don't know how Kenny pronounces his last name, Kenny Sue down there in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th place at 4.3%. All of the candidates below that still add up to 10% of the vote. And if those votes had been able to consolidate around other candidates around second and third choices, there could have been a different outcome. This is a completely nonpartisan thing. This is a Republican primary. So this is only within the Republican Party. This has nothing to do with partisanship, you know, changing the result. So that's just one salient example. There's going to be another runoff in May for our state auditor because nobody got more than 30% in that race. And so another thing to think about is how much money does it cost to run a whole other election because we have to have a runoff? And what is the turnout going to be for those runoff elections? You know, with great respect for the position of state auditor, it's an incredibly important position, but it's not a super glamorous position. You know, the average voter, you know, isn't out there, you know, rallying in the streets for who they want for state auditor. And so I can't help but wonder how many people are going to be motivated to turn out for that runoff. And so how many people are really making the decision for everybody when it was a low turnout election in the first place, and then probably even lower turnout runoff. So that's some problems. Looking ahead to November, here's just a couple of examples of races for Congress where we know that there are 3 candidates running. There's a third party candidate in Congressional District 1, there's a Libertarian on the ballot. In District 2, there's a Green Party candidate. In District 4, there's a Libertarian candidate. So these are all races that are primed for that quote unquote spoiler effect. And this is another problem with the context that we make people run in. If you're Tom Bailey and you're that Libertarian candidate, or if you're Michael Dublin from the Green Party, you're already being vilified for choosing to run at all. People are telling these folks, you should drop out, don't run, because you know you don't have a chance to win and you're just going to draw votes away from our party, from our side, whichever side is our side, right? And that's not good for democracy. We want good people with good ideas and motivation for public service to feel that they can run for office and have their views represented in the election and not be criticized for it. And their supporters in the same vein. The people who might be supporting those candidates have to answer to their friends who are telling them, you're wasting your vote. You know, don't vote for a third party because you know they don't have a chance. Here's the last example. Congressional District 10 also has 3 candidates. And I didn't even dig into the local elections. You know, many of our local elections are nonpartisan, and so there's no primary, and they're going to happen in the fall. And whether it's a partisan election or a nonpartisan, there's still that same dynamic of vote splitting when there's a lot of candidates, a fractured field. We deserve to have people winning office by majority vote. So that's the big idea. So how does ranked choice voting work? I think that most of you are familiar with ranked choice voting. I don't know. So just as a quick recap, the big idea is that instead of having a runoff election in order to get a majority winner, we have instant runoffs where the lowest vote getter is eliminated, and those votes then go to their second choice or their next choice in a runoff election. So in this example, candidate D is the lowest vote getter. They would be eliminated and there would be an instant runoff. It's as if we're having a regular runoff where everybody goes and votes again, but presumably if your first choice is still in the race, you're going to vote for them again in the runoff. So it's only those people whose first choice has been eliminated, they have to choose someone else. We already know who they want because they ranked their ballot. So their votes go to their next choice, and we see if anybody gets a majority. If not, we do it again. The lowest vote getter is eliminated. And ultimately, when there's only 2 candidates left, somebody wins that majority. So we get a majority winner immediately. We don't have to wait however many weeks. Candidates don't have to continue to campaign, which is expensive. We don't have to have the cost to taxpayers of running the election again. And it's a better representation of the true will of the voters, because to win in a ranked choice voting election, you need depth of support as well as breadth of support. So depth is what keeps you in the race and prevents you from being eliminated. You have to have enough first choice votes, second choice votes, so that you stay in the race. But then you need to have enough second, third choice votes that votes consolidate around you in those instant runoffs so that you prevail in the end. That's breadth and depth, and that's a better representation of the true will of the voters. So as a recap, with ranked choice voting, voters have the chance to rank the candidates in order of preference. I will just add as an aside that never does a voter have to rank all of the candidates. Never does a voter have to rank even more than one. If a voter doesn't want to, they can just vote for one candidate like always, and that's perfectly fine. There's been a lot of misinformation out there claiming that somehow ranked choice voting forces people to vote for candidates they don't like, and that if they don't, then their ballot will be thrown out. And that is not true at all. So I just like to sort of nip that in the bud. Ranked choice voting promotes majority winners without the need for a delayed runoff. It really is a pretty simple change that has very powerful impacts. It is not a new idea. Ranked choice voting is used across the country in a number of places. We have over 50 jurisdictions at this point that are using ranked choice voting. 2 states use it, Maine and Alaska. You probably heard about them in the news a little bit. But then there are a lot of other jurisdictions that also have it. There are cities across the country in some states. In Minneapolis and St. Paul, it's used. There are a couple cities in Northern California. All of these states in the South, not North Carolina, but all of these blue states in the South, colored blue on the map, states in the South, use it for their military and overseas voters, because these are states that do have a runoff requirement. They have a majority winner requirement, which is good. And there's not time always to send a ballot to overseas voters and get it back again in time. And so those voters are allowed to indicate who their next choice would be in their initial ballot. So we already have ranked ballots in use in a lot of places. What does the data say? First of all, in all those places that are using ranked choice voting, FairVote has done a whole lot of analysis over the years to actually analyze, is it working the way we say it works? And is it delivering the benefits that we say it will deliver? And the answer is yes, it is. First of all, voters like ranked choice voting, and they use their rankings. When they're offered the opportunity to rank, they do it. So in exit polling in New York City, 95% said it was easy. In Utah, 88%. In Santa Fe, 94%. 68% use those multiple rankings and it's even higher in competitive races. And so that, to me, that says a lot about usability and voter response. We also find that ranked choice voting improves representation. Over the last decade, women have won half of municipal ranked choice voting races in New York City, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Salt Lake City, Las Cruces. They have the most diverse city councils in history since the implementation of ranked choice voting. We also find that voters of color tend to use their rankings, and we find an improvement in representation for voters of color. Here's a little graph. I know this is a lot of data to look at, but it's showing, this top portion is showing people of color on city councils, and the purple is before there was ranked choice voting, And then the total is with ranked choice voting, and the orange represents the growth in representation after ranked choice voting was implemented. So the top one is for people of color, and the bottom one is for women being elected. And so you can see that for both of those demographics that have historically been underrepresented in office, ranked choice voting opens the field, engages more candidates, engages voters, and delivers results, and provides more fair and reflective representation of the electorate. So there's that. Then the other big piece is that ranked choice voting really increases voter satisfaction. This is one of my favorite statistics, which is that ranked choice voting elects winners with broad support. If you think about what is driving the hyper-partisanship that is crippling our government right now, and creating so much distrust in our elections, which is a serious problem for our democracy, it stems from dissatisfaction. It stems from close to half of the electorate feeling like they lost. We have created a win-lose dichotomy where it's all or nothing, and if you don't win, then you lost, and you're not happy with the result. What's really interesting is that with ranked choice voting, it's not just that you get a majority winner, which is more than 50%, but when we look back in hindsight, once we know who the winner is, and we can analyze how people voted, 75% of voters ranked the winner in their top 3. So that is a 75% level of satisfaction. Far more voters are feeling like, you know, I'm okay with it. Maybe I didn't get my first choice, but I got my second choice, or I got my third choice. And to me, that increase in voter satisfaction, and to say it a different way, the decrease in dissatisfaction, I think will do a lot to diffuse the rancor around elections, and the distrust, and this feeling of like there must have been fraud, the system is rigged, right? All of these problems. If we can increase voter satisfaction, we will increase voter trust. So to me, that's a big thing. The other thing is that candidates have to campaign to a broader swath of voters, and so that diminishes the negative campaigning. It forces candidates to focus on issues and problem solving and what they're going to do for the voters, and rather than mudslinging at their opponents. Okay, moving right along. There you go. RCV improves the tone of campaigns. It can result occasionally in what we call a come from behind win. People often ask, is ranked choice voting really going to change the outcome of elections? And the answer is sometimes, in about 11% of competitive races. So again, not all races are even competitive in the first place. So in 6% of all races, but if you pull out just the competitive races, about 11%, the winner will be a candidate who was not the lead in round 1. So the votes will actually coalesce around a second, maybe third place candidate, and they'll leapfrog that leader from round 1 and actually win in the end. That is not a bug, that's a feature. That's exactly what ranked choice voting is supposed to reveal. In those cases where in fact there was vote splitting and the more preferred candidate didn't come out on top at first because of all the fractured votes, but when the votes consolidate, they really are preferred. Ranked choice voting reveals that. But the truth is, far more often, whoever's in the lead in round 1 goes on to win in the end. And so then some people say, well, if it doesn't change the outcome, why should we change the method? And to me, the answer to that is because then you have a much stronger mandate to govern. When you win with less than majority, there's always this cloud hanging over that win saying, look, more people did not want you than did. When we have ranked choice voting and you ultimately win with a majority of votes, it gives you a much stronger mandate to govern. We also find that we have far fewer repeal attempts or recounts and challenges to the outcome. So here's just a couple of case studies. of how the tally worked. If you want to dig into the details of it, this is from San Francisco, seventh district, where you can see it was a crowded field, and round by round, you can see how the candidates were eliminated, the votes were redistributed, and in the end, the candidate who prevailed. In this one, there actually was a come from behind win. You can see that in round one, Myrna Melgar up here at the top only had 20%, but she ultimately won in the end. So that was one of those 11% where it was come from behind. Another case study, this is just a nice quote from a candidate in St. Paul. She says, I door knocked a number of people who had signs up for my opponent, and the conversation didn't have to stop just because they had already pledged to somebody else. And so what we find is that candidates are engaging with voters in order to get their second or third choice. And that's a good thing for governing and a good thing for representation. Here's just a nice before and after photo of the New York City City Council. This is before ranked choice voting, and this is after ranked choice voting. Just a nice visual of the increase in representation for women and people of color on that city council after ranked choice voting was implemented. So there's a lot of uses for ranked choice voting. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing. And what we often see states do is to start slowly. So if North Carolina were to consider doing ranked choice voting, we could conceivably start by just using it for primary elections, or we could just use it for presidential primaries. Or we could do a local option authorization and allow municipalities the opportunity to do it for local elections if they want to, and see how it goes, and let voters get used to it, let election officials get used to it, let everybody get used to it. So it can be used in any of these kinds of contexts. At Fair Vote, we think that the presidential primaries are actually a really, really good on-ramp, because they are only within a given party. So you eliminate all the partisanship that sort of, surrounds elections. It's good for voters. We found that 61% of voters want to rank the candidates for president. They don't like having to choose just one. When you talk to people, when there's a crowded field and you say, who do you like? I mean, this past primary for the Republican primary, you ask people, who do you like? And they say, well, I like Nikki Haley for these reasons. I like Donald Trump for these reasons. I like Chris Christie for these reasons. And people want to rank them. There's another dynamic with presidential elections, which is that our presidential primaries obviously have this long season. It's the whole cycle, and early voting is a really valuable tool for voter engagement and voter turnout. But in the presidential primary, because we're getting results from different states, in this progression of time, if you vote early, especially if you're overseas and you need to get that thing in the mail pretty darn early, it's very possible that you might vote for a candidate who has dropped out by the time your election day rolls around. And then that's a wasted vote. And I mean, I feel really strongly about this, especially for our military personnel. You are serving our country, you're overseas, and your vote ends up not meaning anything because the candidate you liked dropped out before your ballot was even counted. Whereas if we used ranked choice voting, then if your candidate has dropped out, your vote will automatically go to your next choice and you still have a voice. And so it's a huge improvement. So it prevents all those wasted votes. And it's a really good starting point for everybody to start getting used to ranked choice voting. We actually did use ranked choice voting in 2020 in a couple of Democratic primaries. And in 2020, it was the Democrats who had a crowded field, right? And so they were the ones for whom ranked choice voting was ripe. And Kansas is one that did it. And so just here's a little example of how the vote went. There were all of these candidates, or here are the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you can see how the vote went. And then in round by round, as candidates were eliminated, we ended up with 2 who got over the 15% threshold that the Democrats require in order to get delegates to the national convention. So that's where the tallying stopped. Ranked choice voting definitely addresses that spoiler effect. Just a little salient reminder of spoilers. past and potentially present in presidential elections. And it becomes this very salient problem as we're going to be hearing about this in the news so much these days, with RFK Jr. in the race and other third-party candidates who aren't being talked about as much. But I believe Jill Stein is running again. I think Cornel West is running again. So it's not just the Biden versus Trump. And there's a huge question. Nobody expects any of them to win, but there's a huge question of who are they going to draw votes away from more? Which of the between Trump and Biden, who is more at risk from these third-party candidates? And that's just not a good dynamic for our democracy. Back in 2020, just as a reminder, we had these swing states: Wisconsin, Georgia, Arizona. I have Wisconsin on here twice. Sorry about, oh, this is Wisconsin in 2016. These three from 2020, these from 2016, where these swing states made the difference in the general election, and they did not have a majority winner. And here's the big key: the margin between Democrats and Republicans in those states was smaller than the third-party vote. So clearly, those third-party votes, pulling votes away from one or the other, made a difference in the outcome of the election, both in 2016 and also in 2020. So, we're in 2016, it benefited the Republicans. In 2020, it benefited the Democrats, that problem. So ranked choice voting transforms our elections by giving more voter choice. It eliminates that vote splitting and strategic voting. It promotes majority winners. It improves campaign civility. We get better representation, especially for historically underrepresented demographics. And it creates incentives for broader engagement with the voters. Just real quick, here are some examples of what a ballot might look like. For Alaska in 2020, this was the Democratic ballot in the U.S. Virgin Islands. The Republican Party did use ranked choice voting in the Virgin Islands this just most recent primary. Here's an example of what that ballot looked like. Here's an example of the ballot from San Francisco in 2019. This is all one long page. I had to split it into two pieces to fit it on the slide, but it's usually one long legal size piece of paper. So these are the instructions, and then this is what the ballot looks like. So that's my pitch. I know I'm talking fast because it's a lot and limited time. But I think ranked choice voting would be a tremendous improvement for North Carolina. I encourage you to include it in your recommendations, and I am happy to take questions. I will stop sharing and would love to hear, what do you think?
Okay. What I think they'll do is just kind of go down the order as I see folks kind of in the screen here, just to give everybody the opportunity to ask any kind of questions that they may have. Julie, do you have any questions?
Oh, so many questions. I'm actually
fire away.
One of our other committees, this commission, I was asked to write a paper on it for the other committee. Is this one counting votes?
This one's counting votes.
So the primary committee, I was asked to do this. So I've looked at your website, looked at a bunch of research on it, and I'm 100% behind this. I have been for a long, long time. I watched the Alaska results, because I thought that was such an interesting race with Lisa Murkowski and Mary Peltola. So one of the questions I have, two questions about North Carolina in particular, is based on your search, and Michael, maybe you have some insight onto this. What are the realistic obstacles to even getting a discussion going in North Carolina with our General Assembly? Because that's what it would take. And B, I think maybe this is more of a statement, but when North Carolina tried this, what I read was that the biggest obstacle really, Wake and Hendersonville said, yeah, we'll go ahead and do it, but there was no money appropriated for it. So it was up to volunteers to educate people, and educating voters is the most important part of that. And it seems to me that to really have a good set of data to try this out, you would need some money put towards it, money for new election, for new, voting machines, that kind of thing. And I just wonder, all taken together, what are the chances that we could even talk the General Assembly into trying this in a meaningful manner?
It's a great question, and I think there's a couple parts to it. So one is the implementation piece in terms of hardware and software. I have to go back to my notes because I work with 50 states, so it's hard to keep it all straight. But I believe that a high percentage of North Carolina counties, I want to say 90%, but it might be 80 something percent of counties are RCV capable. The voting machines are modern enough that they can run RCV software, and all they need to do is get the software. There's software available from the Ranked Choice Voting Resources Center, which is a national, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization whose mission is to assist election administrators in implementing ranked choice voting. And just coincidentally, it happens to be headquartered in North Carolina, which for what it's worth, they're a national organization. They work with everybody, but they know North Carolina really, really well. For what it's worth, Karen Brinson Bell used to work for the Ranked Choice Voting Resources Center, so she's very familiar with them. And if this were, approved by the General Assembly, she would be well equipped to work with them and see it through. Just saying. So the software is available from them for free. Obviously, it would need to be certified. There's a certification process that would have to be done. So we have to be sure to give everybody a long enough on-ramp for the whole, process that's needed. So I'm not suggesting that we would try to approve this in 2024 and use it in 2025. I think that would not be a good idea. I think we ought to give everybody, I would say, about a 2-year on-ramp would feel like what we've found in other jurisdictions is that that's an appropriate and adequate prep time to be able to do it. Some folks try, ask for longer, and I feel like all that happens then is it just gets delayed. Like they don't do anything in the first 2 years, and then when it's 2 years up, they're like, oh shoot, we better start doing something about this. So I think 2 years is sufficient. For the rest of the county, for those counties that are not RCV capable, they would need an equipment upgrade. But the truth is, at this point in time, if your equipment is not RCV capable, it's probably about time for an upgrade anyway, because anything that was manufactured within the last 10 years is RCV capable, unless you are, now I got to go back and look at it. Is it clear ballot, or is it, I have to go back and look at which vendor is still not RCV capable. There's one out of the 5 major vendors that's not RCV capable, but we don't use them in North Carolina, so it doesn't matter. The vendors that are used in North Carolina, their equipment within the last 10 years is RCV capable, as I recall it. So there is some upgrading that would be needed in terms of software, but it's not an insurmountable obstacle. It's work. I'm not saying it's not going to be a lift, but it can certainly be done. The voter education side is also a very important piece, and I agree with you that it does need some funding. One part I think to remember is that there's the voter education that's done by the election officials, by the election board in every county, and they're doing voter education for every election anyway, right? They have to produce a voter guide. There are instructions in the voter guide on how you fill out your ballot. So that, the marginal cost, when you think we're producing a voter guide of however many pages that gives information about the candidates and where to vote and early voting dates and all the things that are in that guide, the number of pages that would need to be added to that guide to cover ranked choice voting and how it works is like one extra page. It doesn't take a lot of real estate to explain how the ranked ballot is going to look and to show what the instructions are and how to fill out your ballot. So I think, it's not like it's this massive printing cost that would be added. The bigger cost, I think, is is education in terms of like voter outreach. And that's a place where you can have support. Like back in 2007, 8, 9, when Cary and Hendersonville were pilot testing this under the pilot program, there was nobody out there to help with that kind of education. Today, there's a state organization called Better Ballot North Carolina, which is a ranked choice voting advocacy group. And so if there were municipalities, or statewide, if we were using it, if there was a ranked choice voting election happening, there are volunteers across the state who are ranked choice voting supporters and could be, leveraged to help with that kind of outreach and education. I have to check. I will be transparent. I don't know what our laws are in North Carolina about like outside participation and outside funding of voter education. In some states, they have like super strict laws, like you can't get grant money to help do voter education because it's perceived as outside influence. But in other states, that's perfectly fine. They're like the people doing the voter education, are, if it's the election board, they're a public agency, they're well monitored, there's transparency, there's all the safety protocols in place to make sure they remain nonpartisan. But if the state doesn't want to budget the necessary money to really do a good job, and they're able to get some grant support to do a better job, in some states they're like, have at it. So I would have to defer to you on whether that would be an option to try to seek some grant support. If that is an option, I think that would be very possible. I mean, I'm not going to guarantee anything, but I know that there are supporters of this reform that that want to see it succeed, and so there's good potential for some grant support.
And I think that, to me, and Dr. Bitzer, you can probably address this better, but is there even a chance that the General Assembly would approve it? I mean,
well, that's politics, obviously. And I guess I feel like, that's what Better Ballot North Carolina is working on, working in terms of growing a base of support for this reform, educating voters about it. But certainly having it in the recommendations from this commission. This is a nonpartisan commission and an official working committee. And for this committee to include it in the recommendations as a valuable nonpartisan reform that would make North Carolina elections, more effective across the board, I think that's an important step. So, it may still be a heavy lift in terms of political, engagement with legislators. But I would say that that's not a good reason to not include it in your recommendations. I think having it in,
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And we can certainly have this conversation in a future committee meeting, and kind of as we're drafting our draft report, can certainly, talk about this issue and see where the committee lies and where the other commission members may have questions that we could certainly answer for them. Stephen, do you have any questions for Diane?
I don't know that I have any questions. I got multiple pages of notes just from her comments, but and I'm a note taker, proliferate, as some of the committees have determined. But I've also pulled information over time, starting back when I was on the Board of Elections in Buncombe County, and watching things that happened in Henderson County. And so I have more insights than I would questions. I'm pretty confident that if our recommendation is potentially for pursuit of this, no offense, Julie, but I'll be writing my other recommendations in a minority report on that. And there's a number of reasons. One, I think we need to focus on voter interest, to do our best to try to encourage them to come out and have a reason to vote. I have been involved intimately, sorry, my phone keeps ringing, intimately in strategic planning for campaigns. I can see where I would purposefully work to design, develop, and fund alternate campaign parties, to do my best to not pull votes from 1 and 2, but hopefully encourage them to have mine as their number 1 or 2 choice to help me be part of the 11%. And just think of the impact of 11% on 435 seats. You know, that's roughly 48 seats in Congress. That'd be pretty dramatic for the one who came in second to launch in the first in a closely competitive race, which leads me to another thought and comment, is that the data that's being predominantly used to support this are in voting areas where one party voting is overwhelming. There's not a lot of data that shows a competitive race between an R and a D. It's all in a D versus D, and they have their own special ways of fighting in primaries, as do ours. And so I think there's one applicable place that is absolutely important. I think it is excellently applied to those individuals, especially military or civil service individuals who are overseas, because of that ballot lingering effect, and it's unfair for them. But it circles back around. The reason I like to see 1-on-1 at the very end in a primary is because issues come out in the final hours, sometimes the final week, if you're lucky, probably not more than that, that you don't have the opportunity to debate for another 30 days. So that's just no question. It's just, those are all my thoughts. I didn't mean to open it up for another complete presentation as you just presented, because it was very well done. And I just have done a lot of reading and research about this, and it raises great concern for me because of the reasons I just outlined, and another number of things that I've written down in my notes. So I've taken too much time for my editorial. I'm sorry, but thank you. Thank you for letting me state my thoughts.
All right. All right. Rachel.
So yes, I'm Rachel Raper. I'm director in Orange County. And in 2008, I believe it was, there was a statewide instant runoff voting for a judge seat that I was part of. So I just have probably some post-traumatic stress from being involved in that. So again, just not so fond memories of, you know, back in my day when we had to do different rounds of running ballots through our machines. And that was a pretty messy process. So certainly interested in what the software looks like when we move to actually implementing ranked choice voting.
If I could respond just for a second,
Sure.
I feel your PTSD. I do. And thank you for that work way back in the day. And you are going to love the RCV tabulator. It is now the push of a button, the same way that you tabulate pick one elections. You know, when it's time to tabulate, you hit the button on the machine and it runs the tally. That's what the RCV tabulator does. There is no feeding ballots through the machine 20 times. I also know that in Wake County, I think there was some concern about the capability of the equipment at that time, and so that there was a choice to do a hand count, and it turned out to be incredibly labor intensive. It is incredibly labor intensive to do a hand count. I do not dispute that at all. The good news is that that is not necessary. Like the equipment and the software is so much better now, and so much more tried and true. Again, there are 50 jurisdictions, more than 50 jurisdictions across the country that are using ranked choice voting now. And so I would say that, like, if there are concerns from an administration perspective, we could certainly put you together with election administrators from some of these jurisdictions who have done it. And you can talk administrator to administrator with them and hear their experience and ask your technical questions, and they can answer those. So I would urge you to keep an open mind in spite of that negative experience back in the day.
All right. I'm going to skip over Jennifer and make sure Scott has time as well. I know we're getting close to 1 o'clock and the end of our committee meeting, but Scott, do you have any questions?
No, I don't. I thought that was a nice presentation, Diane. Thank you very much.
All right, great. Jennifer, thank you for joining us. Do you have any questions?
Nope, I'm good. I thought it was a great presentation, and I met Diane at our luncheon, and glad that she had a chance to present to the committee.
Thank
Okay.
you so much for the opportunity.
I want to follow up. I've got two questions. One, actually, both came from Judge Wagner, so I want to make sure to get those asked. First, and I think you kind of addressed this, but she was actually a candidate, a judicial candidate, when North Carolina had the ranked choice voting for judicial candidates. And her big question was, in meeting with voters, and this kind of gets to the voter education component, a lot of the voters felt confused by the process. How would they, how would their votes actually be counted and the processes there? You talked a little bit about the kind of voter outreach and general electorate outreach to kind of think about and to educate. This is certainly a group that's going to try and work on education for the general public. Do you have any experience or insights as to what other jurisdictions have done to kind of, you went through some of them, but some specific issues, or, maybe as kind of a follow-up, would you have any recommendations of what other jurisdictions have done to successfully educate voters?
Yes, it's a great question and a great point. And again, I would say that way back at the time of that election, there was no support, like having a Better Ballot North Carolina in existence to do that kind of education. The biggest improvement today, and what a lot of jurisdictions use, is practice elections using online apps. There are several online apps that run ranked choice voting tallies. And so we do all kinds of fun practice rounds week by week, where I think in Alaska they had the election of the week. And so like this week, it's going to be favorite ice cream flavor. And next week, it's going to be favorite NBA team. And next week, it's going to be favorite author, and whatever. You try to find topics that cover the range of public interests, and you have some number of candidates, and they get plugged into an app. People can scan a QR code and get it on their phone, and they can practice ranking the candidates, and then they get to see the results round by round. It's obviously the results change if it's not closed. Sometimes the election is left open for participation. So it's like today there are X number of votes, and the result at the moment is this. And then tomorrow there might be 100 more votes, and the result might change. But the educational value is the same. So they can vote, and then they can see round by round how the results are tabulated. First, they see the final result. With X number of votes, the final round winner is so-and-so. How did we get there? In round one, this is what it was. It's a lot like the slide that I showed you of how the votes transfer. And that has been super effective in engaging voters, because it's a topic that's non-controversial and they understand. And if they get in there and do a practice round or two, they feel very well prepared to come in and then vote their real ballot.
Okay.
That would be my number one recommendation.
Okay, great. And then the second question was about the threshold. I guess for a lot of these elections, we have winner take all. It's a single election winner. Would the state be required to set a threshold of 50% plus one for things like the primaries and general elections to have that determination of who gets to the ultimate threshold?
The state doesn't have to do anything. I mean, the state legislature can do whatever it wants. So the way that ranked choice voting is designed, I think the intent is that for a single winner seat, the threshold to win is a majority threshold, 50% plus one. And that, I think that it would probably be confusing to voters if North Carolina chose a different threshold, because there's a lot of information out there now nationally. I mean, we at Fair Vote do a great deal of national education and outreach. And again, there are 50 some jurisdictions already doing this. And so lots of information is out there on the internet about how ranked choice voting works. And so if somebody is going to like Google it and they're going to get something, it's going to say, this is how it works. And the threshold is 50%.
Right.
So if North Carolina's threshold was different, I think that would be a little weird.
Yeah, no, I was just saying, would
you know, but
would
if
it
you wanted
require
to
that
do-
50%?
it wouldn't require it. I mean, if the legislature wanted to do some kind of a hybrid, you know, like if they said we like our top two runoff, you know, if nobody gets a majority, we want a top two runoff. Personally, I don't recommend a top two runoff. If there's a desire for a runoff, and I see some of the arguments of like, we like having runoffs. We like, if there's a crowded field, we want to winnow it down, and then just those get a little more time to make their case to the voters, and the voters are only focusing on those two. I understand that argument. If there's a desire for a runoff, I would recommend more like a top 4 or top 5 runoff rather than just 2, because you can still have vote splitting. If it's a super crowded field, you can have vote splitting so that even those top 2 might not really be the one, might not include the one who the voters like best. And if you had a ranked choice system where, you know, if you had 10 candidates and you're going to winnow it down to 4, and then those 4 are going to go to a runoff, those 4 are far more likely to represent the breadth of who the voters want than just 2. You know, so if there was a desire to keep the runoff system, that would be my recommendation.
Okay.
Would be something like a top 4 or a top 5, and you could even do that in the primary if you wanted to. But then you lose the cost savings benefit. One of the benefits that we tout is you don't have the expense of running another election in May. But if the decision is that's worth it to us, we want to pay for it, sure.
All right. We've got about a minute left. Any further follow-up questions from anyone? All right. Well, Diane, thank you so much for your time and presentation. And if you would just kind of, if you're willing to share it with the group, you can either email it to me or email it to Rachel Capon, and we'll get it distributed to the rest of the members along with a link to this particular video that they can review as well.
Okay, will do. Again, thanks so much for the opportunity. And if there are questions in the future, or if somebody wants to discuss more, we are always available. I'm happy to engage some more.
Great. All right. Thank you so much to everybody. And we'll keep in touch with the process, and we'll look forward to seeing folks at next month's meeting.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.